Hello Year 9 and welcome to the final video on Chang's Wild Swans. I'm now going to be looking at the Reform Through Labour Camps section of the book. So again, listen, read along and consider what is so wild about what Chang is saying about these camps. Bearing in mind the fact that Chang's parents, remember, are high-ranking Communist Party officials. So what are they doing in these types of camps? And what does it suggest about who was safe or who wasn't safe in Mao's China? Okay, it may be important for you to kind of remind yourself what the purpose of these camps were and how does Chang describe what happens to them in those camps. So we're going to start off by looking at the experience of her mother. She arrived there in November 1969 with her 500 former colleagues from the Eastern District, rebels as well as capitalist roaders. Because they had been ordered out of Chengdu in a hurry, there was nowhere for them to live except for a few shacks left by army engineers who had been building a railway from Chengdu to Kunming, the capital of Yunnan. Some squeezed into these, others had to cram their bedrolls into the houses of local peasants. There were no building materials except coggon grass and mud, which had to be dug out and carried from the mountains. The mud for the walls was mixed with water and made into bricks. There were no machines, no electricity, not even any work animals. On the flat land, which is about 5,000 feet above sea level, it is the day, rather than the year, that is divided into 4 seasons. At 7 in the morning, when my mother started working, the temperature was around freezing. By midday it could reach the high 80s. At about 4 p.m. hot winds swirled through the mountains and literally swept people off their feet. At 7 in the evening, when they had finished work, the temperature plummeted again. In these harsh extremes my mother and the other inmates worked 12 hours a day, breaking only for a brief lunch. For the first few months all they had to eat was rice and boiled cabbage. The camp was organised like an army, run by army officers, and came under the control of the Chengdu Revolutionary Committee. At first, my mother was treated as a class enemy, and was forced to stand for the whole of every lunch break with her head bowed. This form of punishment, called field-side denunciation, was recommended by the media as a way to remind the others, who were able to rest, that they should save some energy for hatred. My mother protested to her company commander that she could not work all day without resting her legs. The officer had been in the military department of the Eastern District before the Cultural Revolution, and had got on well with her. He put a stop to the practice. Still, my mother was given the hardest jobs, and she did not have Sundays off, unlike other inmates. The bleeding from her wound worsened. Then she was struck down with hepatitis. Her whole body was yellow and swollen, and she could hardly stand up. And now on to Chang's father's experience. My first sight of my father after over a year was harrowing. He was trotting into the courtyard carrying 2 baskets full of bricks on a shoulder pole. His old blue jacket hung loose on him, and his rolled-up trouser legs revealed a pair of very thin legs with prominent sinews. His sun-beaten face was wrinkled, and his hair was almost grey. Then he saw me. He put down his load with a fumbling movement, the result of overexcitement, as I rushed over to him. Because the Chinese tradition permitted little physical contact between fathers and daughters, he told me how happy he was through his eyes. They were so full of love and tenderness. In them I also saw traces of the ordeal he had been going through. His youthful energy and spark had given way to an air of aged confusion with a hint of quiet determination. Yet he was still in his prime, only 48 years old. A lump rose in my throat. He was not allowed into the kitchen. As an anti-Mao criminal he was alleged to be so dangerous he might poison the food. It did not matter whether anyone believed this. The point was in the insult. My father bore this and the other cruelties with fortitude. Only once did he allow his anger to show. When he first came to the camp he was ordered to wear a white armband with black characters saying, "Counter-revolutionary element in action." He pushed away the armband violently and said, from between clenched teeth, "Come on and beat me to death. I will not wear this." The rebels backed away. They knew he meant it, and they had no order from above to kill him. Based on what we've just read from Chang's book, how does it compare with how Mao presented China? How do her mother and father experience life in these camps? Remember, what was the purpose of these camps, and does that seem to be happening for her mother and father? How does she feel about that? How does she feel about what's happening to them and the suffering they're enduring? And crucially, based on all of that, therefore, what makes her book so wild? What made her book have to be banned still in China? Also, I'd just like to remind you that if there are any words that were unfamiliar in the text, please make sure you look them up to help you. and overall I hope these videos have been useful in the writing of your essay.